Emperor Xia pondered over what was asked of him, turned to look at Yi Futian, and said, Yi Futian, this is an internal affair of the Dali dynasty. If a war between realms were to break out, if I were to simply interfere and take the imperial advisor away, Emperor Li can just show up at Emperor Xia's realm and take him back now? Emperor Xia pondered over what was asked of him, turned to look at Yi Futian, and said, Yi Futian, this is an internal affair of the Dali dynasty. If a war between realms were to break out, if I were to simply interfere and take the imperial advisor away, Emperor Li can just show up at Emperor Xia's realm and take him back now? Even if a war were to break out, there still needed to be a balance. Renhuangs would have attacked easily. If they were to kill people below the Renhuang plain, it would be tantamount to genocide. No one else would be able to fight the Renhuangs. Emperor Xia claimed that even if a war were to break out, the imperial advisor was still a representative of the Dali dynasty. If he were to interfere in the imperial advisor's execution through the use of force, it would anger Emperor Li. Yi Futian knew that, which was why he advised the imperial advisor to consider settling in the Crimson Dragon realm. Father, Xia Qingyuan called. The emperor turned to her. Shen then said, We remained on the defensive in the battle at Crimson Dragon realm. We retaliated only after Li Yao and the others made a move against us. Li Yao was also leading the others to violate principles of the Battle of Empty Realm. Do you think that we took everything thrown at us lying down? The emperor looked at them and with a bitter smile, shook his head. He then said to Yi Futian, I shall take you to Emperor Li's realm, but I'm afraid that Emperor Li is already thinking about what to do with the imperial advisor as we speak. I can't guarantee the outcome of the matter. The fate of the imperial advisor and the imperial advisor's residence depends solely on them. Thank you, Your Majesty, Yi Futian bowed. Despite what Emperor Xia said, there was hope as long as he was willing to act on his own. Emperor Xia lifted his head and in an instant, his will swept all over the place. The will of Renhuang was tremendously powerful, capable of shrouding vast areas within mere moments, enveloping the entire royal palace within. It continued to extend outwards, reaching extremely far places. The Swordmaster of Lihan had just returned to Lihan Heaven. He then looked up at the 33rd layer of heaven and said, Your Majesty. A spectral face appeared in Lihan Heaven, and it was none other than Emperor Xia's face. I'm going to Dali for a bit. Would you mind joining me? Emperor Xia asked. The Swordmaster of Lihan nodded and answered, Not at all. We shall depart immediately, the emperor said. There were also several other mighty figures there aside from the Swordmaster of Lihan, who received Emperor Xia's orders. They took to the air right away. A gale swept through Emperor Xia's palace, and will of Renhuang swept all over the place, taking many within. Yi Futian was also in that storm. His silhouette vanished from the palace at that moment. Not even he knew where he was going. Xia Qingyuan stayed where she was. She stood as she watched the people in front of her vanish. Emperor Xia, Yi Futian, and the great shaman had disappeared, taken away by her father. Countless people in the royal palace looked up at the palace in the 9th layer of heaven. All of them sensed the raging might, and they wondered where Emperor Xia was heading. Xia Rong was also in the royal palace. He initially intended to see his father, but he quickly noticed the changing clouds in the sky. He was somewhat shocked, but knew that Yi Futian had gone along with Xia Qingyuan to see his father. Is father heading to the Dali dynasty now? He wondered. When Yi Futian and the others returned to Emperor Xia's palace, the mighty ones from Dali, who had gone to the Crimson Dragon realm, returned to the Dali dynasty. News swept throughout Dali Imperial City. The imperial advisor had betrayed Dali, aiding those from Emperor Xia's realm, who were responsible for Li Yao's death, and letting them escape. The news was earth-shattering, causing a huge commotion throughout the city. Everyone sensed that a terrifying storm was coming. No one had completely forgotten what had happened when the imperial advisor had let Yi Futian of Emperor Xia's realm escape. That caused quite a bit of noise in Dali, and the Prince Regent dealt with it personally. Now another incident of such magnitude happened again, and everyone wondered what consequences awaited. Furthermore, some high-level figures had long known of Li Yao's death, and the news came from Emperor Li's palace. However, no one knew exactly what had happened just yet. As the news of the imperial advisor's treason spread, one could imagine the intense commotion it caused. All of Dali Imperial City became shrouded in a stifling atmosphere. The imperial advisor of Dali had been a top-notch figure who had served one and reigned above all in the Dali dynasty. Nanjai caught wind of the news in the imperial advisor's residence, and he finally understood why the place was being watched. Something had happened after all. Li Yao had been killed in Crimson Dragon Realm. His teacher had gone there to take charge of the battle, and so his teacher naturally was responsible for Li Yao's death. But just how did Li Yao die? And how did such news spread? Things in the royal palace were dreadful. A thundercloud seemed to have shrouded everyone's heads. The imperial advisor was someone with great influence in the royal palace, even affecting the supreme being he served. It was said that he sold out his nation, so one could imagine what was going through the mind of that supreme being. A group of mighty ones stepped into Dali Imperial City. The imperial advisor, the Prince Regent Li Zhen, the third prince, Chao Kong, the demonic leader, and many other top-notch figures were there. They had traveled straight for the royal palace at blitzing speeds above Emperor Li's realm. The imperial advisor was surrounded, at his flanks, by the Prince Regent, Chao Kong, and all the others. They looked extremely cold. Regardless of how encompassing and tolerant the imperial advisor had acted, a testament of his breadth of character, Yi Futian was nonetheless seen as an enemy of Dali. Murderous intent was vaguely in the Prince Regent's eyes, even as he deemed the imperial advisor's actions as a death wish. In the past, he had waited for the imperial advisor to make a mistake, so that he could ask the advisor to step down from the center of power. It would enable the Prince Regent to reclaim his powers and retake the glory that belonged to the royal members of Dali. He never thought of killing the imperial advisor though. Not even Emperor Li would do anything against the imperial advisor, unless he had committed some grave, utterly unforgivable crime. However, the imperial advisor had indeed committed a grave, utterly unforgivable crime. It was more than just the death of Li Yao. If the prince were to die in battle, the imperial advisor might have only needed to shoulder some responsibility for it. The case was worse because despite being the imperial advisor of Dali, he did nothing after Li Yao died. He had gone so far as to spare Yi Futian, the man who Dali wanted to capture, the man responsible for causing Li Yao's death. What he did amounted to treason. Imperial advisor. The Prince Regent called after seeing him stop. Yen Yuan, get back to the house with everyone else, the imperial advisor said to Yen Yuan and those around him. The Prince Regent frowned and said, best head to see His Majesty first. The imperial advisor shot a plain glance at him and continued, I'm the only one responsible for the offense. I would go with you all to His Majesty to stand trial. It has nothing to do with my students. The Prince Regent wanted to insist, but he did not say much more after seeing the imperial advisor's cold expression. After you then. If Yen Yuan and the others were to leave with the imperial advisor, they would have nowhere to go. They would likely get pinned down in Dali Imperial City. Yen Yuan stopped and looked to where his teacher headed. Mu Chunyang and the others were at his side as well. None of them followed their teacher, although they wanted very much to do so. Let's head back, Yen Yuan said. He knew his teacher's intentions and remembered what his teacher had said to him. Look after Feishue. Even if something were to happen to their teacher, all of them still had their missions to accomplish. As such, they did not head to the royal palace with the imperial advisor. Countless witnesses looked up at Emperor Li's path, seeing the imperial advisor and the others streaking by. They were reluctant to believe that the imperial advisor had betrayed Dali. It seemed impossible. If the imperial advisor had intended to betray Dali, he wouldn't have needed to wait until now. Furthermore, the imperial advisor had no reason to betray Dali. Those who had immense respect for the imperial advisor had a hard time believing any of the accusations. However, all of them felt extreme anxiety, seeing the looks of the ones traveling above. Many had even headed to and gathered around the royal palace, wanting to receive first-hand news, to see what would happen from that point on in the royal palace. The royal palace was already a sight. The atmosphere both in and around it was stifling. The imperial advisor looked at the majestic palace buildings and sighed deeply. He was trained in the deed of thorough comprehension, enabling him to see things that a lot of people were unable to see. It was all very mystical. He knew that the trip would not be a smooth one, that it would affect the fate of Dolly. However, some matters were set in stone, and even if one were able to foresee them, it did not mean that one could simply change those matters as they wished. The group walked towards the royal palace with especially heavy steps. The atmosphere throughout the entire royal palace seemed unusually severe, and a lot of people were around. They walked towards the tall, majestic, grand hall in the royal palace one step at a time. Many mighty ones were around. Even members of the royal family were present. A figure was seen standing above the steps of that hall. He looked supreme and undeniable simply by standing and looking on those below him. That figure was none other than Emperor Li. The Prince Regent and the others arrived. The Prince Regent took Li Yao's body from the person behind him. He carried Li Yao, walked to the steps, and then knelt on the floor, putting Li Yao down. "I have failed, Your Majesty. Please see to my punishment," the Prince Regent said, and his voice was heard throughout the air. Everyone claimed that it was the imperial advisor who had committed treason and was to blame. But then again, those high-level figures had also some responsibility for the death of His Majesty's son. The Prince Regent would not have been foolish enough to attack the imperial advisor. He apologized for his mistakes before anything else. "I too have failed you, father." Li Zhen, the third prince, knelt on the ground, lowering his head and not daring to look at Emperor Li. Emperor Li stood at the top of the steps and looked at Li Yao's dead body. He then stepped forward and began walking down. He walked very slowly, and everyone focused on each step. Many knelt and silently prostrated themselves on the ground. Emperor Li did not have the highest regard for Li Yao. Nonetheless, he was of the emperor's bloodline and his biological offspring. One could only imagine the implications of His Majesty's son dying out there. Even if the emperor were to punish all of them, it would still have been reasonable. If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Emperor Li walked down the steps of the palace and came before Li Yao, looking in an emotionless manner at his son, who was lying there quietly. Emperor Li walked down the steps of the palace and came before Li Yao, looking in an emotionless manner at his son, who was lying there quietly. No one could tell by the expression on the emperor's face what he was thinking. However, everyone sensed an extremely stifling aura. If the emperor unleashed his might, that aura alone would have prevented anyone from standing straight. The royal palace was dead silent. Such extreme silence spoke of extreme dread. The imperial advisor looked at Emperor Li and bowed, saying, "Your Majesty, it is my fault that His Highness perished. Please see to my punishment." He lowered his head and did not defend himself. The evidence lay right before him, and any argument would have been pointless. He had already decided in Qinya City of the Crimson Dragon Realm that he would shoulder the blame, taking whatever punishments were dealt. The emperor continued to look at Li Yao, his head lowered, as if he had not heard anything the imperial advisor said. The wind blew, and everyone in the palace felt a chill as if the place were very cold. Emperor Li finally moved. He lifted his head slowly, looked at the Prince Regent, and then at Li Zhen before he looked at the others. His eyes eventually rested on the imperial advisor. "Imperial advisor, have I ever been unkind to you?" Emperor Li asked. The Prince Regent knew what was going to happen upon hearing the emperor's words. The era that belonged to the imperial advisor was over. The imperial advisor could have made many mistakes, but the one that he had just committed was one that no man who stood at the pinnacle of power would ever understand. He had committed treason. He may have needed only to kill Yi Futian, or at least fought him in a frenzy for a while, and His Majesty would have forgiven him regardless of the outcome of the fight. However, he did nothing. "I have indeed failed to meet your expectations despite all that you have done for me, Your Majesty," continued the imperial advisor as he bowed. "Why did you choose to betray Dolly for a single person?" Emperor Li asked. The emperor knew what had transpired, and he knew that the imperial advisor had done what he had done for one person, Yi Futian. That young man had once infiltrated Dolly as the seventh swordsman. He was unable to understand why the imperial advisor disregarded it and insisted on sending Yi Futian, a sage at the time, away. And now Li Yao, a prince, had been killed, and he still refused to make a move against Yi Futian. The emperor knew what it meant, and yet the imperial advisor made such a choice all the same. He was unable to understand. The emperor had sent the imperial advisor to the Crimson Dragon realm, hoping that the imperial advisor would have been able to make a choice. And here was the outcome of the emperor's efforts. I was aware of your expectations, Your Majesty. However, there were other matters that I was aware of, and yet unable to bring myself to do what you expected. I had no intention of betraying the Dali dynasty, but that was the way things turned out to be, nonetheless. I have no intention of speaking for myself, but Yin Yuan even suffered severe damage to protect the 9th prince. I hope you would be able to forgive him, and allow all of them to choose their own paths. I do hereby swear that they would not hold any grudges against Dali. The imperial advisor bowed and knelt, saying, I am willing to be sentenced to death to atone for my crimes. The entire royal palace was moved. The most supreme figure under the emperor of the Dali dynasty asked to be sentenced to death. He intended to shoulder all crimes on his own. He did not argue, nor did he try to weasel out of his predicament. Emperor Li then looked at the imperial advisor with intense disappointment in his eyes. He then said, Imperial advisor, you should understand that this is not what I wish to see. The imperial advisor kept his hands flat on the ground and said nothing. He knew what the emperor would have wanted and knew what he should have done to survive. However, he did not do so because then he would no longer be who he was. He would have never spared Yi Futian in the Crimson Dragon realm in the first place. Imperial advisor, shouldn't you be asking for mercy, that I absolve you of your crimes instead? The emperor saw that the imperial advisor was unmoved, and his eyes looked increasingly imposing and stern. An even more terrifying aura washed all over the heads of everyone. The prince regent lay prostrated on the ground and felt extremely shaken. He was jealous of the imperial advisor. He knew what the emperor meant between the lines. The emperor remained reluctant to kill the imperial advisor. He wanted to give the imperial advisor a chance. However, the imperial advisor did not want a chance. The emperor was already dropping hints that if he was willing to ask for forgiveness, that the emperor would absolve him of his crimes. If he was willing to atone through his future merits, submit to and fight for Dali, and be willing to kill Yi Futian in revenge for Li Yao, there would be a chance for him still. Emperor Li was willing to forgive and continue to use him. However, the imperial advisor did not do any of that. He had said that there were matters that he was aware of, and yet was unable to bring himself to do them. He deemed fighting for Dali and killing Yi Futian off limits. Is he really making a death wish there? The prince regent was puzzled by what was going on in the imperial advisor's mind, and why he was so insistent. He jealously grew. The prince perished, the imperial advisor had done nothing, and still, the emperor was willing to give him another chance. The imperial advisor was perhaps the only person in all of Dali who would have been given such treatment. There definitely would not have been another. He knew that if their places had been switched, and if he had done what the imperial advisor had done, the emperor might not have given him, even being the emperor's nephew, another chance. He knew that deep down. Seeing that the imperial advisor remained unmoved, the emperor's eyes showed intense disappointment yet again. It was more than just his betrayal at the Crimson Dragon realm. It was that the imperial advisor no longer intended to serve him. Prince Regent, take Li Yao and do what you have to with him, Emperor Li said. Yes, Your Majesty. The Prince Regent answered and nodded before taking Li Yao's body away. He knew that Emperor Li had made a decision. If the imperial advisor was making a death wish, and was unwilling to save himself, no one could save him. Emperor Li was willing to give him a chance, and yet he simply threw that chance away. The emperor then turned around and walked up the steps. Standing on top, he gazed at the people below. His eyes eventually rested on the imperial advisor. Imperial advisor, I would be willing to forgive you for any mistakes, but you shouldn't have let me down in such a manner. The emperor kept looking at the imperial advisor as he slowly said, The imperial advisor has betrayed the Dali dynasty. I shall spare his life because of all he has done for Dali throughout the years, allowing him to be rid of his training by his own hands, and be incarcerated. The emperor was not speaking loudly, but his will shrouded the entire Dali imperial city nonetheless. His voice was heard throughout the city. In that instant, countless people in Dali imperial city felt a shock within, and were extremely overwhelmed. Everyone had been paying attention to this case of the imperial advisor betraying his nation. Then Emperor Li declared that the imperial advisor had committed treason. Those who were reluctant to believe that felt as if something in them died. The imperial advisor had indeed betrayed Dali, they wondered. They felt their hearts bleeding and a sense of dread deep down, especially those who had practically worshipped the imperial advisor. Countless members of the younger generations looked up to the imperial advisor, seeing him as a role model. Success like his was a goal they trained diligently for throughout the years. The emperor's voice felt like the sky crashing onto their heads. The sky that lived vividly in their minds was no more. The imperial advisor helped build the Dali dynasty to what it was on that day, but now he was sentenced to give up his training and be imprisoned. At that moment, many in the Dali Academy looked up to the sky, and some knelt on the ground saying, "Please pardon the imperial advisor, your majesty." The sounds of so many people kowtowing on the ground emanated ceaselessly from the Dali Academy. They were heard saying loudly, "Please pardon the imperial advisor, your majesty." That was not all. As they pleaded on behalf of the imperial advisor, the space right outside the royal palace turned black from the massive crowd kneeling. Many were astonished by what was happening. The imperial advisor was probably the only person in Dali who commanded such prestige. None of them could see Emperor Li, but they all knew that because the emperor's will had shrouded the entire city, he could hear their pleas. Yen Yuan, Fei Xue and the others heard the emperor's voice in the imperial advisor's residence. And they too felt as if the sky had come down on them. No doubt, it was a shock like no other for everyone in the imperial advisor's residence. Fei Xue's face was ashen in an instant, devoid of any color. Her steps became erratic as she struggled to stand still. Yen Yuan held her still. Tears flowed from those blind eyes of hers. She bit her lip, keeping herself from crying. Father sentenced him to end his training and be imprisoned? Yen Yuan looked up. His eyes were red, even though he had speculated that things would end up this way once his teacher had decided to take the blame for everything. The students of the imperial advisor's residence did not kneel nor plead. The emperor's voice was heard throughout the entire city, and they figured that pleading would be pointless. The emperor had made his decision, and there was no changing his mind. No one could easily change the mind of a Renhuang. The imperial advisor confessed voluntarily to his crimes and asked for a death sentence. I did not want to pardon him. However, given his contributions to the Dali dynasty throughout the years, I have decided to appoint Li Zhen, the third prince, as King Zhen, and the daughter of the imperial advisor as Queen Zhen. The imperial advisor's residence shall remain as it is. The eldest student of the imperial advisor, Yen Yuan, shall be a candidate for imperial advisor, and he shall be appointed as the next chief of Dali Academy, to continue to foster capable people for Dali. He shall take the position of imperial advisor when he becomes a holiness of nirvana. At that moment in Dali Imperial City, the minds of the people were shaken by the emperor's words. While the imperial advisor had betrayed Dali and was subsequently tried and imprisoned, his daughter became the queen. She was married to Li Zhen, the third prince who was the most extraordinary of the princes. If he succeeds his father in the future and rules over the nation, the imperial advisor's daughter shall reign over the nation with him. It was glory of the highest order. The imperial advisor's crimes did not harm those close to him. Instead, they had been rewarded. Even Yen Yuan, one of the imperial advisor's students, would be able to become the imperial advisor in the future. Such was the breadth of the emperor's grace. Is this the bearing of a Renhuang? In the royal palace, the prince regent's mind was extremely shaken, as well, impressed by what the emperor had done. It was not something that the prince regent would be capable of doing. He had speculated about what the emperor might do with the imperial advisor's residence, but he never expected something like this. Fei Xue was married to Li Zhen, and would be given the title of queen. Li Zhen was the most highly regarded prince, and no one doubted the emperor's decision. People were impressed by the grace that he had shown. Furthermore, the students of the imperial advisor were all extraordinary people, and the emperor had chosen to continue valuing them instead of acting against them. He had even prepared Yin Yuan to take the imperial advisor's position in the future. With Fei Xue entering the palace as queen, Yin Yuan and the others would never act against the royal family. Furthermore, Yin Yuan would have the chance to keep the royal family members in check once he became a holiness of nirvana. Everyone was astonished by how the game was played. Their emperor was their emperor for good reasons. The imperial advisor looked up at the emperor. He knew that if he shouldered the blame, the emperor would not have vented frustration at the imperial advisor's residence for the time being. The emperor may have wanted to harm them, but the timing was inconvenient. Furthermore, all of his students had vibrant luck and destinies unlike him. What happened was not something that he could have ever predicted, so he simply went with the flow. He never anticipated that things would turn out as such. If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. The emperor's move not only showed the magnificence of his imperial bearing and might, but also enabled him to use Fei Xue as a hostage. The emperor's move not only showed the magnificence of his imperial bearing and might, but also enabled him to use Fei Xue as a hostage. There was no way Fei Xue could have joined the palace's ranks and become a queen. The imperial advisor said to Emperor Li, "I thank you, Your Majesty, for pardoning the people of the imperial advisor's residence. However, Fei Xue is blind and her body is frail. I'm afraid that she would not be worthy of such an honor. As for Yin Yuan and the others, I'm afraid that they will have their reservations because of what happened to me. I ask you to allow them to choose their own path." Emperor Li lowered his head and looked at the imperial advisor with much disappointment. He was confident that he had been very good to the imperial advisor, but it seemed that the imperial advisor had never truly been willing to serve him wholeheartedly. The imperial advisor outright refused to serve him any further, and even asked for his daughter and students to be pardoned. He hoped that none of his students would have to serve the emperor in the future. The people of the imperial advisor's residence are to come to the royal palace at once, Emperor Li said with a booming voice that was heard throughout Dali Imperial City, including the imperial advisor's residence. Yin Yuan, Fei Xue, and the others were at the residence and heard the emperor's decree. They were speechless. Emperor Li wanted to get rid of the imperial advisor, yet he had other plans for the rest of them. We all are willing to leave Emperor Li's realm and never come back. We shall also never become enemies with Dali. Please let us be on our way, Yin Yuan said with a voice that was heard everywhere. Yin Yuan knew what his teacher's choice was, and he respected all that his teacher did for them. At present, he only wanted to finish what his teacher hoped for, take Fei Xue, and leave that messy place of a nation. He did not think of going all out to save his teacher, nor did he bother pleading, as all of that would have been pointless. Yin Yuan, the first student of the imperial advisor of Dali, had indeed inherited everything from his teacher. Prepare to welcome those from the imperial advisor's residence into the royal palace, ordered Emperor Li. Many mighty ones from the royal palace took to the air and headed for the imperial advisor's residence. They were going to bring Fei Xue and the others into the royal palace. However, Emperor Li frowned all of a sudden before looking up at the sky. Boundless might and pressure swept out, causing the people in the royal palace to tremble. It seemed as if a run huang was shrouding the entire place. Emperor Li was angered. What is happening? He never showed such a severe, solemn side, even when he was looking at Li Yao's body or dealing with the imperial advisor's treason. Clouds rolled in, and a terrifying might from the heavens arrived. A single will shrouded the entire Dali imperial city and made people tremble as they looked to the sky with frightened expressions. Who is that? It was Renhuang level might and pressure, just like that of Emperor Li. Renhuangs from foreign imperial realms were coming to the imperial city of the Dali dynasty. It was no surprise why Emperor Li was in such an extreme mood. Is there a need to force others to go against their own will, Emperor Li? Asked a voice from above that all within Dali imperial city could hear. They looked up to the sky and saw a group of descending gods. It was especially clear in the royal palace. A group had appeared in the sky, and the one taking the lead was a supreme Renhuang indeed. The hearts of the people raced as Emperor Xia arrived. This is a matter for Dali. Since when did you, Emperor Xia, get to interfere? Emperor Li said in a very calm tone, looking at the silhouette in the sky. The affairs of Dali are indeed none of my business, however. The Dali dynasty have provoked Emperor Xia's realm time and again. As such, I have brought some of the strongest figures to be found in our realm, to spar against the pinnacle figures of Dali. I'd like to see how your training had been progressing, Emperor Li, Emperor Xia said. And a group of silhouettes descended from the sky to his side. Every one of them was at the pinnacle of Saint Plain. Among them was the great shaman, the swordmaster of Lihan, Lu Yu, and even the sacred general of Tian. All four holiness of Nirvana saints had arrived in Dali Imperial City with Emperor Xia. That was indeed an extremely powerful lineup. There was another figure standing quietly behind Emperor Xia's back, Yi Futian. He turned his eyes to the imperial advisor below in the royal palace, and felt pain deep down. When the imperial advisor decided to spare him that day, he had been ready to shoulder all of that. The imperial advisor rose and looked at the sky. A lot of thoughts were going through his mind. He never anticipated that Yi Futian would get Emperor Xia to move there, bringing four pinnacle figures to Dali Imperial City. Emperor Li looked at the young man behind Emperor Xia. A member of the younger generation had not only moved the imperial advisor enough for him to commit treason by sparing him, but this young man affected the imperial advisor so much that he was even willing to be stripped of his honor and give his life to avoid killing him. That same young man had, at present, been able to get Emperor Xia to show up in the city. It seemed that Emperor Li had underestimated the young man, who had disguised himself as the seventh swordsman and infiltrated Dali. Emperor Li had even thought of marrying a princess of Dali to Yi Futian, to make the young man his son-in-law. If you would like to find that out, Emperor Xia, I shall indulge you. But first, I need to take care of some business in Dali, Emperor Li said plainly and turned his eyes to the imperial advisor. The imperial advisor knew what the emperor wanted of him. The emperor had declared his sentence. The imperial advisor was to give up his training and be incarcerated. Emperor Xia took one step, and the heavens shook at that moment, as if they were about to crumble. The entire Dali imperial city shook. Everyone was being overwhelmed with terrifying power. Emperor Li was able to feel that the most. Emperor Li's eyes were cold as he looked at the figures high in the air. The might of Renhuang was unleashed and spread out with great force. One step was all it took to bring extreme, imposing pressure sweeping throughout the place and holding the heavens in place. Are you going to make me do it instead, Imperial Advisor? Emperor Li then looked down at the Imperial Advisor below, who was seemingly waiting for the Emperor to do it. The Imperial Advisor looked up at the Emperor. He knew that until he was either dead or crippled, the Emperor would not have let him off the hook. There was no way Emperor Li would have let him leave Dali Imperial City unscathed. There was a concern about him leaving and siding with Emperor Xia's realm. Emperor Li had made up his mind, and no one else was going to sway him, not even when Emperor Xia was right before his eyes. Boom! A frightening explosion was heard, and extreme, devastating powers filled the space around them. The aura surrounding the Imperial Advisor's body ran amok, as if there was only devastating power to be had. Teacher! Yi Futian looked at the scene from high above the air, and shook his head at the Imperial Advisor. I have been disloyal, and today, I shall be rid of my training to repay my debt of kindness and grace to you, Your Majesty. But please, let Yin Yuan and the others leave, the Imperial Advisor pleaded. Devastating power punched through his body as soon as he finished. That raging aura penetrated his body, terrorizing it as it went through. The Imperial Advisor spit blood, and his face was ashen. His aura weakened drastically, but he remained looking at Emperor Li in the sky. Emperor Li looked down with a cold expression. Even given his current predicament, the Imperial Advisor was still occupied with thoughts of his daughter, Feishue, leaving Dali with Yin Yuan and the others. Am I merely a tyrant who is simply out to eat them alive in his eyes? Emperor Xia looked down below and sighed deep down. The Imperial Advisor understood. that if he did not make a move, then the emperor would. There was no way he would have been spared. If he were to rid himself of his training, there would still be hope for the ones in the imperial advisor's residence. It was quite a shame that someone who had the opportunity to pass the trial and become a renhuang was to fall in the royal palace of Dali on that very day. Please, Your Majesty, the imperial advisor continued. Yet another burst of immensely devastating power punched through his body. A frightening storm whipped up with him in the center, but did not attack the others around him. It was simply crushing him from the inside. They could hear the sounds of his bones and meridian paths breaking, and red blood spilled out of the corner of his mouth. His supreme body remained standing tall and firm where he was. Even the indescribable anguish that he suffered at that moment did not cause him to flinch, and he remained adamant in seeing it all through. Sounds reverberated throughout the area and rumbled the eardrums of everyone around. Several people were on their knees outside of the royal palace, pleading for the emperor to spare the imperial advisor. Emperor Li's eyes turned even colder, and he looked below. The imperial advisor shall be granted special parole to attend the wedding of King Zhen, Emperor Li said, and took a step towards Emperor Xia in the air. Emperor Xia willed, and the sky changed. A boundlessly large lotus flower enveloped the space where he and Emperor Li were. Futian was gradually enveloped within as well. He witnessed how the imperial advisor continued to be harmed, while he continued to suffer intense heartache from above. That figure who had been standing tall finally bent and slouched over. He was no longer able to stand firmly. His hair turned a lot more silver within a single instant, and he became very withered. Imprison the imperial advisor. A voice was heard from below. Futian was no longer able to see what was going on down there. He was dragged by Emperor Xia to where only Emperor Xia and Emperor Li were present, standing against each other. The imperial advisor was hauled to the prison in the royal palace of Dali. A group of mighty ones then began to make a move, heading towards the imperial advisor's residence. They were getting ready to welcome the people of the imperial advisor's residence into the royal palace. However, the four holiness of Nirvana from Emperor Xia's realm were right outside the royal palace. When the prince regent and the other mighty ones emerged, the great shaman stood in their way. Sword aura and demonic might burst in another direction. The swordmaster of Lihan struck at Chao Kong. More mighty ones emerged from the royal palace. King White, one of the four kings, emerged as well, and Lu Yu stood in his way. You all, get to the imperial advisor's residence, and get them to the royal palace, the prince regent said. Many mighty ones began to head straight for the imperial advisor's residence. Even after the imperial advisor begged, again and again, Emperor Li stuck to his decision to keep his students and daughter around. It was apparent that he still wanted the people of the imperial advisor's residence to remain in the realm. The sacred general of Tian headed towards the imperial advisor's residence. It wasn't long before they arrived. Yin Yuan and the others were at the imperial advisor's residence, and all of them sensed that the mighty ones were heading at them from all directions. The imperial advisor's residence had become the absolute center of the royal palace in an instant. Father. Tears streaked down Feishua's face. She felt worse than death at the moment. The imperial advisor's residence was not that far away from the royal palace. The overwhelming aura in the palace was felt all the way to the imperial advisor's residence. Feishua, let's go. Yin Yuan looked sad, determined to leave Dali. His teacher was imprisoned, and Feishua's special constitution meant that there was no way she could have entered the royal palace, marry Li Zhen, and become a queen. The only option for them was to run. At present, with Emperor Xia holding Emperor Li back, and the four holiness of nirvanas that Emperor Xia brought holding back Dali's pinnacle figures, it was the right time for them to escape. If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Yin Yuan and the others had yet to depart when an overwhelming aura shrouded the entire area. Many mighty ones came from all directions. Yin Yuan and the others had yet to depart when an overwhelming aura shrouded the entire area. Many mighty ones came from all directions. Yin Yuan took one look in the air and saw a group of them arriving. The one who took the lead emanated a terrifying aura. It was none other than King Tiandao, who held great power in the court of Dali. Yin Yuan's eyes sparkled with an intent to kill when he saw the person by King Tiandao's side. It was none other than Wang Zhong, another of the imperial advisor's students. Mu Chunyang and Nanjai also looked at Wang Zhong and said nothing. Their teacher knew that Wang Zhong had always been hostile towards him, yet he nonetheless saw Wang Zhong as a student of his. Knowing that there might be a day when Wang Zhong could take his life, he remained unfazed. However, at present, the imperial advisor's residence was caught in a crisis. Wang Zhong had chosen to betray them and sided with King Tiandao. Since it had come to that, they no longer needed to consider past sentiments. From that moment, the two parties stood as enemies. Yin Yuan, His Majesty has given an order. Head to the royal palace with us, King Tiandao said condescendingly as he walked. The terrifying aura of a holiness of nirvana burst forth, weighing on Yin Yuan and the others. Yin Yuan looked at King Tiandao and said, "I'm afraid I can't do that. His Majesty has been graceful enough to not punish the people of the imperial advisor's residence, and to make the imperial advisor's daughter a queen. He also made you a future imperial advisor. However, you choose to resist orders and caused Emperor Xia to come here. It would seem that the imperial advisor's residence has indeed betrayed Dali," King Tiandao said coldly as his eyes sparkled with murderous intent. He threw his palm forward and attacked. A boundlessly huge and heavy ring of light descended from the heavens, shrouding Yin Yuan and the others with intense suppressing power. Under the huge light, the space was on the verge of being crushed. The force was unstoppable. The might of a holiness of nirvana was brought to bear within an instant. King Tiandao claimed that the ones from the imperial advisor's residence had committed treason, which meant that he was determined to destroy them. He was not emperorly, and saw no need to give them any chances. Diagrams of the Great Path appeared before Yin Yuan, and their surroundings howled. He put up his hands and headed straight for the sky above, putting up a divine golden wall right above the imperial advisor's residence. The ring of light descended, clashing hard with the diagrams. Their surroundings rattled as the residence began to come apart, and a burst of devastating golden lightning lashed out. The entire imperial advisor's residence was reduced to dust in an instant. Mu Chunyang flashed his blade and cut down the golden lightning, intercepting the attack above Feishue. King Tiandao was lauded as one capable of fighting on equal footing with the imperial advisor. While Emperor Li's elder brother was inferior to the imperial advisor in many ways, he was still nonetheless at the pinnacle of the Dali dynasty. There was no doubt about the ferocity of his powers. He walked in the sky. The ring of light of the Great Path turned into waves of golden light and swept downwards. Yin Yuan grunted as the pressure of the Great Path weighed on him. Boundless golden lightning had torn the place apart, and the diagrams of the Great Path were on the verge of crumbling. Mu Chunyang and the others were ready to get on their knees. "Yin Yuan, stop resisting, and take your orders from the royal palace," King Tiandao advised him. His presence was overwhelming, and everyone, even those far away from the imperial advisor's residence, was shaken. Yin Yuan looked up at the sky. He had been injured during the Battle of Empty Realm, and he was at his wits' end on how to fight King Tiandao, who was a pinnacle figure in the Dali dynasty. His eyes were wild and his robe billowed. The 5 elements and dualities of the Great Path appeared around him. He lifted his hands to clap on the diagrams of the Great Path again, resisting the force coming from above. The imperial advisor gave up his training, confessed, and will be incarcerated. "Are you having a death wish now, Yin Yuan?" King Tiandao said coldly, after seeing that he was still resisting. Mighty ones gathered around them, surrounding the entire imperial advisor's residence, and leaving them with no chance of escape. Yin Yuan's eyes turned red as he thought about all that his teacher had sacrificed. Since his teacher no longer had any intentions of serving Emperor Li, there was no way the emperor would have simply let him leave, not even when Emperor Xia showed up. If Emperor Li was insistent on them staying, then not even Emperor Xia would be able to stop him. As such, he had agreed to end his training, and pleaded with Emperor Li to spare the ones at the imperial advisor's residence. Even if that was futile, at the very least it showed that he was sincere in his confession to placate Emperor Li. Furthermore, If Emperor Li still insisted on having them all stay, he would have nonetheless been affected by the imperial advisor's actions. Even after pleading for mercy in such a manner, he could not convince Emperor Li to spare the ones from the imperial advisor's residence. However, he was no longer able to fight against them, and delegated that to his subordinates instead. Because of that, and because of the mighty ones that Emperor Xia brought here to keep things in check, they seized the chance to escape. They all knew that Fei Xue's condition would not have permitted her to be a part of the royal palace. As such, they had to resist one way or another. They simply had to leave. Our teacher had not done any wrong against Dali, Yin Yuan said to King Tiandao, who was bearing down on them from above. Burst of golden lightning lashed out at Yin Yuan in an attempt to kill him. Yin Yuan's body was rumbling. Boundless runes circled him. Qian Kuan, Qin Li, and many other ancient symbols hovered in the air then melded with the great path. What do you mean doing no wrong? King Tiandao berated coldly. Raging aura lashed out on Yin Yuan's body, making him feel like he was going to come apart. And even his powers of the great path were about to crumble. His conscience was clean, and he was able to stand proud, facing the heavens and the earth. Yin Yuan continued saying loudly. His body felt as if it was about to explode. Blood splattered on his clothes, and his aura weakened at breakneck speed. Humph. King Tiandao snorted and coldly said, I see that you still dare to resist. Do you have a death wish? Fei Xue was able to sense everything that was happening below. Despair was written on her face as she turned toward the battlefield and called out, Eldest brother. He is fine. Nanjai looked above, and while Yin Yuan was severely injured, the diagrams of the great path and the ancient symbols surrounding him turned even brighter, transforming into a diagram of yin and yang of the great path. It spun chaotically and became increasingly bright, resisting the pressure from above. At that moment, boundless light from the diagram of the great path seeped into Yin Yuan's weakening body, making him seem like a furnace of the great path, fusing the power of the heavens and the earth. His aura, which had been weakening, rose in a frenzy, breaking his limit within an instant, and he became even more powerful than when he was at his peak. Furthermore, his powers continued to increase, and the boundlessly terrifying diagram of the great path extended far and wide, blocking out the sky. King Tiandao frowned and looked at Yin Yuan below. His pupils dilated and a flash of cold, murderous intent was seen in his eyes. That was Yin Yuan breaking into the next and final level of the Saint Plane, becoming a holiness of nirvana. As heaven's movement is ever vigorous, so must a wise man ceaselessly strive. I can't just roll over and die, Yin Yuan said. His finger pointed to the diagram of the great path. Golden, giant swords shot up to the heavens right at King Tiandao, who was stepping on the ring of light above. The space exploded in that instant, and incredibly brilliant, harrowing rings of light swept in all directions. King Tiandao's body was sent flying higher. Those who watched the battle from afar avoided the aftershocks, and their hearts raced as they saw the great path's ring of light sweeping the sky. They then saw King Tiandao standing tall in the air. Someone as powerful as King Tiandao had been thrown behind. Yin Yuan, the imperial advisor's eldest student, made a breakthrough and became a holiness of nirvana. It hadn't been long since Emperor Li had said that if Yin Yuan were to become a holiness of nirvana, then he would be eligible to become the imperial advisor. It didn't take long for him to make a breakthrough and become a holiness of nirvana. He could take the imperial advisor's place and reign supreme in Dali if he was willing. However, it was apparent that Yin Yuan did not have such thoughts. Power was but fleeting clouds to him, and he had no intention of staying behind. When Dali had been united and the imperial advisor, King Tiandao, the prince regent, and other high-level figures took charge, it became glorious and prosperous. Yet there were also many lurking perils. If it had not been for those lurking perils, they would not have sent his teacher to the battlefield at the Crimson Dragon realm, and his betrayal would have never happened. Solid dikes could collapse because of ant holes. Lurking perils, when not dealt with in time, could have caused earth-shattering changes when fully manifested, which was what happened on this day. However, some things were unavoidable, and no one could do anything about it. They could only watch them unfold. His teacher had not been able to change what had happened in the past. At that moment, however, Yin Yuan wanted to take fate into his own hands. King Tiandao looked at Yin Yuan, whose aura became increasingly overwhelming and still growing. He had unleashed the pressure of pinnacle levels. King Tiandao did not expect that Yin Yuan would have a breakthrough with a single step. Students taught by the imperial advisor had already been able to get into nirvana levels. But then again, despite having broken into the final plane, Yin Yuan was nonetheless a new holiness of nirvana, and was deemed incapable of fighting King Tiandao on equal footing. King Tiandao began to take a step down. However, he halted before he could complete his step. They looked far away. Terrifying currents washed over them and howled. A figure streaked through the air and arrived right before him. A huge palm struck from above, shrouding the place as it headed for King Tiandao. King Tiandao turned around, and his extremely sharp aura burst. His hands streaked through the air and looked even more terrifying than blades. His attack split the palm open, and the sky rumbled. King Tiandao, you have been provoking us for years. If you want to fight so badly, I shall fight you in earnest on this very day. This imposing voice was heard loud and clear. The sacred general of Tian had arrived, and was stepping towards King Tiandao. Every step was extremely heavy, bearing on the sky around them. Since when did affairs of the Dali dynasty become something you could directly interfere in? Asked King Tiandao as he looked at the sacred general of Tian. His body burst with overwhelming might of equal magnitude. Interfering with Dali's business? The sacred general then jabbed at him sarcastically, saying, I'm not interested in that in the slightest. However, since you people have been trying to stir up trouble, and had even acted against the princess of Emperor Xia's realm, and the others in the Crimson Dragon realm, showing that you were up to no good, I have come with Emperor Xia to see what you're made of. He attacked as soon as he finished talking. King Tiandao frowned. With Yin Yuan's breakthrough, no one else could stop this holiness of nirvana, even if he were held back by the sacred general of Tian. He took one look at the sky. Both Emperor Li and Emperor Xia were nowhere to be seen. If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. The sacred general of Tian and King Tiandao fought all out right there and then. King Tiandao was from the king of Dali's military, known as the leader of the Four Kings. He commanded the military forces of the West. The sacred general of Tian and King Tiandao fought all out right there and then. King Tiandao was from the king of Dali's military, known as the leader of the Four Kings. He commanded the military forces of the West. The sacred general of Tian was the commander of the first army of the Eight of Emperor Xia's realm. Both men were people of extreme overbearing might. The battle fought between them shook the heavens. It seemed as if the sky would be brought down when they fought. Yin Yuan looked at them both fight above, and knew that the sacred general of Tian intended to hold that pinnacle figure behind for their sake. Second brother, take care of Fei Xue. Yin Yuan turned around and looked at Nanjai, who nodded. Yin Yuan was seen stepping out and headed far away. Mu Chunyang held his sacred blade and followed right behind. One was a holiness of nirvana, who had just made a breakthrough, while the other was an unblemished saint. Both of them burst with extremely overbearing might. However, there was already an army of saints surrounding them, effectively blockading the space they were in. An 8 trigrams heaven-locking diagram appeared in the sky. Golden chains of the 8 trigrams sealed the space away, and crashing noises were heard. The chains streaked through the sky and headed towards Yin Yuan and the others. Boom, boom, boom. Yin Yuan's body felt like it had been chained up by countless chains in an instant. However, extremely dazzling diagrams of the Great Path dazzled around his body. He, who had become a holiness of nirvana, dazzled incredibly. He grabbed onto the chains of the Great Path, and devastating power was unleashed from his body, wrecking the boundless chains. He stepped into the air and headed towards the 8 trigrams diagram, thinking if he should take his opponent using matrices imparted to me by his teacher. He pointed towards heaven, and his body streaked down below the 8 trigrams diagram like a bolt of lightning, pointing to the diagram right above him. His finger pointed to the diagram that had blockaded the place, and countless cracks were seen on it, spreading out in all directions. The fish of yin and yang seemed to be swimming before they crumbled shortly after. The matrix above him shattered, and many mighty ones' bodies were thrown behind right away. Many saints above burst with their respective might, and headed for Yin Yuan and the others. Yin Yuan stepped out and scanned the crowd around him, saying, "My teacher once was the imperial advisor of Dali, and I'm a citizen of Dali. There are some among you people who had studied at Dali Academy before. I don't want to kill any of you. Make way." Doom. He took one step forward as soon as he finished. The air shook. Swords of the Great Path surrounded him, and howled, as if they would have burst through the air at any given moment. Many mighty ones sensed the brimming aura emanating from Yin Yuan, and they all thought of retreating right there and then. As Yin Yuan put it, they were all people of Dali, and some had studied in Dali Academy and received guidance and teaching from Yin Yuan himself. Many among them had been taught by the imperial advisor, and had always been impressed by the imperial advisor. If it had not been for the circumstances, none of them would have wanted to see the imperial advisor have his training destroyed and be imprisoned. None of them would have wanted to kill Yin Yuan. The imperial advisor's residents committed treason and sided with Emperor Xia's realm. They are ready to leave with Emperor Xia. Kill them. King Tiandao, who was fighting with the sacred general of Tian in the sky, far away shouted. Some of the ones who had hesitated moved forward once again. But then again, there were many who stood behind and were unable to bring themselves to harm the people of the imperial advisor's residence. They knew very well that even though it was then a fact that the imperial advisor had refused to carry out His Majesty's order, the imperial advisor would have never been in bed with those from Emperor Xia's realm and betrayed Dali. The imperial advisor was a great figure, unlike any other, and he would have never had been such a dishonorable person. There were definitely not obvious reasons. Countless sighed at the situation. Many mighty ones attacked Yin Yuan at the same time. Yin Yuan looked up at the sky. The saints all appeared in his will. He stepped forward and had no more words to say. The bursts of devastating attacks were not only directed at him, but also Fei Xue and the others, without any mercy. Struggle and reluctance were seen in Yin Yuan's eyes, which then quickly cleared as he looked at the faces before him. Everyone had their stances and decisions, especially when they had become saints. Since they had already made their choices, then they no longer needed to hesitate. The powerful burst of aura swept through his surroundings at the thought, shrouding the vast space. Many saints there were shrouded by a mystical will within an instant. They seemed to have seen a boundless huge diagram of the Great Path, which enveloped all of them. Countless ancient symbols hovered around, and their saintly will were all bound within. They intended to struggle, yet they found it difficult to shake it off. The dazzling boundless diagram seemed to have led them into a space of will, which was ethereal, and Yin Yuan was at the center of the diagram. He scanned those around him, and one ancient symbols after another shot out. Qian Kuan Kinli. Every single ancient symbol that emerged was infused with extremely formidable power. Slay them, Yin Yuan said, and within an instant, the symbols bombarded the minds of those around him. In the sky where they fought, there were saints whose wills were cut down right away by the sword will. Streaks of blood appeared at the center of their brows as their eyes were wide open, glaring at Yin Yuan below. There were also mighty ones whose wills were shattered right there and then, feeling as if their minds had rattled before losing consciousness altogether. Their bodies dropped to the ground. One saint after another perished in the sky within the same instant, dropping to the ground below. Many watched that scene unfold from far away, and felt things were astonishing. All of those people were saints, and yet, they were all killed within an instant. So this was the power of Yin Yuan, who had become a holiness of nirvana. Emperor Li had declared that the first student of the imperial advisor would be allowed to take the position of imperial advisor right there and then. However, he wanted nothing more than to leave. Just what the hell happened between Dali and the imperial advisor's residence? Countless felt that to be a pity. One way or another, there was no longer an imperial advisor in Dali, and the imperial advisor's residence now ceased to be. That would have been a huge loss to Dali dynasty. The emperor knew that as well, which was why he still wanted to give the imperial advisor a chance, which the imperial advisor threw away without hesitation. The emperor intended to continue employing Yin Yuan and the others, even after he had arrested the imperial advisor, which was why he wanted Fei Xue to be married into the royal palace as Li Zhen's wife and to be titled as queen. However, none of that managed to make them stay behind. The crack in their minds was something impossible to be repaired, and there was no turning back. Yin Yuan and the others from the imperial advisor's residence had only one way to go from then on out. At that moment, on another battlefield, a legion that King Tiandao had brought circled Yin Yuan and headed straight for Mu Chunyang and Nanjai, attacking them. Judging from their formations, it looked as if they intended to break through Nanjai's defense and take Fei Xue. They all knew that if they were to take the imperial advisor's daughter, then the ones from the imperial advisor's residence would not have been able to leave, even if they wanted to. Mu Chunyang's blade was extremely ferocious, splitting the space before him open as soon as he swung it. His will of the blade seemed to have cleaved open everything before him. Several saints caught in the storm were quickly killed. However, there were also several extremely powerful saints around at the same time. They were all unblemished saints, and they have intercepted Mu Chunyang, isolating him from the battlefield of Nanjai, Luchuan and Fei Xue. At that moment, an unblemished saint led many other saints heading to where Fei Xue and her two other brothers were, attempting to surround them, and the situation looked perilous. Nanjai was at the forefront while Fei Xue and Luchuan stood behind him. Nanjai's expression remained extremely calm even when facing such a situation, without the slightest hint of being fazed. Yin Yuan and Mu Chunyang were still fighting their own respective battles. The eldest student might have become a holiness of nirvana, but that is not to say that we would let him loose just because he wants to leave, an unblemished saint said and lifted his hands, grabbing at the space before him. A holy dragon bared its fangs and brandished its claws right away, descending from above and wanting to take down Nanjai and the other two. That person's might was brimming, and he looked poised. It was apparent that he was a member of Dali royalty, making him one of those from the side of the royal members. That holy golden dragon circled above Nanjai's head, and its pressure was burning. It charged below after letting out a loud roar. Nanjai looked up at the sky plainly and waved his hands. A huge painting spread open in the sky, which showered the space around. An extremely holy pressure burst from it. The might was imbued with the will of the great path, as if he was wielding a piece of an extremely powerful divine implement. Countless dazzling diagrams within the painting lit up with brilliant light, and a boundlessly huge ancient tree burst, emerging with countless vines that lashed out above, blocking out the sky. The dragon dived, and was instantly caught within the countless mass of vines in an instant, which was then devoured bit by bit. Many looked below in shock, seeing Nanjai standing above the ancient tree in the painting. Fei Xue and Luchuan stood behind him. All three of them seemed to have become characters within the painting, looking very mystical. What was even more shocking was that at the very moment Nanjai entered the painting, will of the great path of boundless strength burst from within. The painting continued to expand, and when Nanjai melded within the painting, his aura seemed to have melded with the painting and rose in a frenzy. He had broken through the bonds of Saint of True Self and became an unblemished saint. His powers continued to rise after becoming an unblemished saint, climbing to the pinnacle of his current plane. How could he be so powerful? Many looked at the scene in shock. Everyone in Dali knew that the strongest among the Imperial Advisor's students was Yin Yuan, while Nanjai, the second student, was unfettered and had a good mindset. He loved painting and jesting around, but his training had not been powerful. He was only a saint of true self. His powers were even inferior to his younger brother Mu Chunyang. However, at that moment, none dared to claim that Nanjai was weaker than Mu Chunyang. His current power was of such magnitude that not even Yin Yuan before becoming a holiness of nirvana would have had such a brimming, formidable aura. The way of painting. Everyone was shaken and knew that they had underestimated Nanjai's powers. His training might have only been that of a saint of true self, yet his painting seemed even stronger. His powers spiked as soon as he entered the painting. That unblemished saint before stepped out with a cold expression and attacked with the saints around him, intending to tear down that ancient tree of vines. The painting continued to expand, so much so that it had blocked out the sky. Those saints quickly found that they seemed to have become people in the painting, entering Nanjai's work and becoming a part of his powers. Many knew that something was off and intended to run, but it was too late. Unraveling sounds were heard as the painting spread through the area, catching everyone within it. The vines of the ancient tree consumed the saints, while sword aura and many other killing powers burst from the painting. At that moment, it seemed as if Nanjai had not been the one surrounded. It seemed as if he was the one who had everyone else surrounded instead. If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. A huge painting was seen high above the sky, embroiling many saints around within. Even unblemished saints were caught as well. A huge painting was seen high above the sky, embroiling many saints around within. Even unblemished saints were caught as well. That unblemished saint royal member attacked ferociously from within the painting, yet the painting itself nullified all of his attacks. The painting was infused with the power of the great path of the world. Celestial bodies were found within, and the heavens and the earth were in motion. Matrices were also found within the painting, which made it so that the painting had indeed been infused with the power of the great path. So this is the life spirit of Nanjai? Countless looked up in the sky. They witnessed royal members being sucked into the painting bit by bit, and they felt very rattled within. They had the impression that Nanjai, the second student of the imperial advisor, was inferior to Mu Chunyang, the third student, and his presence had not been as strong. Even when Nanjai was giving lectures in Dali Academy, he looked carefree and unfettered. Everyone knew that he was very knowledgeable and had different concepts and views regarding training. However, no one knew that Nanjai's true powers were something of such formidable magnitude. He had made painting a way of manifesting his power of the great path. He had the world in his sleeves, which was manifested in his painting. In yet another battlefield at that moment, Yin Yuan continued to bring his might to bear and blaze the trail. He continued walking forward. No one had been able to stand in his way. Mu Chunyang followed closely behind. The huge painting that Nanjai conjured flew in the sky and took off far away. Any saints who were still standing in their way high above in the air were unable to help but make way, retreating to the sides. They all felt astonished and shaken deep down, not daring to face the students of the imperial advisor. It seemed that no one was able to stand in the way of the students, other than the likes of Holiness of Nirvana. However, all Holiness of Nirvana found in Dali Dynasty's imperial city had been kept busy by people brought by Emperor Xia. There was also some other Holiness of Nirvanas to be found, but they were not in Dali imperial city. Many were astonished and thought that if the imperial advisor had not been dealt with, he would truly be at the very pinnacle of sainthood in all of Dali dynasty. However, he was incarcerated at the moment, which was a situation many found to be a pity. Yin Yuan and the others cut all who dared to stand in their way down and headed to the sky. Their silhouettes went further and further away from sight, seeming about to disappear before everyone's eyes. Everyone who saw that scene understood that the people of the imperial advisor's residence had truly made up their mind. They wanted to leave Dali dynasty. There was no longer an imperial advisor's residence in Dali from then on out. Yin Yuan and the others eventually disappeared without a trace as they continued to streak the sky. However, the Holiness of Nirvana's battles in Dali imperial city were still ongoing. Every single battle was an astonishing one and caused their surroundings to shake. Furthermore, the battles continued for quite some time. While there were stronger and weaker ones to be found, none were able to kill their opponents. Fighters from both sides were top-notch. While there were still differences to be had, yet said differences were not great enough to have any of them kill their opponents. For instance, it was obvious that the sword master of Lihan could overpower Cao Kong, yet Cao Kong was extremely resilient, continuing to fight despite suffering severe injuries. People of such levels had terrifyingly adamant will. both Emperor Xia and Emperor Li were still nowhere to be found. It was thought that Emperor Xia intended to keep Emperor Li busy, giving a chance to those from the imperial advisor's residence. He told Yi Futian, before that while he was willing to go to Dali dynasty, the fate of the ones from the imperial advisor's residence was eventually up to them, and that he was unable to do anything further. He couldn't take them away personally after all. If he were actually to do that, then Emperor Li could have crashed into Emperor Xia's realm and taken them away all the same. As such, despite having brought people with him, Emperor Xia was still there to teach those from Emperor Li a lesson in name, for they had been provoking Emperor Xia's realm for far too long. Emperor Xia never mentioned those from the imperial advisor's residence, despite the fact they were the reasons why Emperor Xia showed up. The battles raged on and on. Both Emperor Xia and Emperor Li were seen yet again in Emperor Li's palace, emerging in the palace building they were before. Yi Futian was behind Emperor Xia. Emperor Li's expression turned rather cold after he scanned the city with his will. At the same time, Emperor Xia said instead, "Let's get back to Emperor Xia's realm." The great shaman and other holiness of nirvanas all retreated and left after the order was given, without any intention of fighting any further. Their opponents intended to pursue them, yet Emperor Li said, "Let them leave." Emperor Li, I know that you have wanted to test Emperor Li's realm's strength for years, but if you are thinking of taking the Emperor Xia's realm for yourself, Dali is still far from being powerful enough to do so. I don't mind if you want to wage war against us. I shall be waiting back in Emperor Xia's palace, Emperor Xia said plainly. He took flight and waved his hand. The great shaman, the sword master of Lihan, and others came to his side and were preparing to leave. A flash of light was seen, and Emperor Xia brought his men away. Yi Futian, who was right behind him, took one look below, as if wanting to find where the imperial advisor was. However, they disappeared within an instant, emerging in the sky elsewhere. The ones from the imperial advisor's residence are safe now, but the imperial advisor wanted a death sentence, trying to exchange the safety of his people with his own life. I assume that he understands that Emperor Li would have never let him go even if he wanted to. As such, he got rid of his training using his own hands, and was willingly incarcerated, Emperor Xia said while looking at Yi Futian. Yi Futian was speechless deep down. He knew, too, that there was no way the imperial advisor could have escaped. However, with his teacher having destroyed his training and being incarcerated, Yi Futian hoped that his teacher was still alive. While that would have been difficult, there was still hope. The expression of Emperor Li, who was still in the royal palace, appeared rather glum and severe after they left. He did not pursue Yin Yuan and the others, slowly going somewhere else instead. The place was a golden prison, which was suppressed by the Great Path. The imperial advisor was imprisoned within. There was the light of chains within the prison of the Great Path, chaining him within. The imperial advisor had lost all of his brimming appearance from the past. His aura appeared weak. He looked unusually withered, far older than common old people. Your Majesty, the imperial advisor lifted his head. The color is his eyes were dim as he looked up at the emperor. The emperor looked at him as well, standing there quietly without saying anything. One figure after another arrived through the sky. It was King Tiandao, the Prince Regent and the others. They all bowed and stood there quietly. The people of the imperial advisor's residence were able to escape the city in their watch, which meant that they were naturally responsible. 4 holiness of nirvana were lost in Dali within a single day. Emperor Li looked at the imperial advisor and continued, I'm still unable to understand why you would be willing to go to such lengths to let him go. I want the truth from you. The imperial advisor had been at the pinnacle of sainthood in Dali. After all, Yin Yuan had become a holiness of nirvana, Nanjai displayed supreme powers, and Mu Chunyang was extremely formidable as well. Both of them would soon become holiness of nirvanas themselves. As such, Emperor Li claimed that Dali had lost 4 holiness of nirvana within a single day. The emperor was still puzzled and wanted to ask the imperial advisor. He wanted an answer. The imperial advisor looked up at Emperor Li. A smile was seen in his murky eyes as he said, Your Majesty, I'm puzzled myself as well, but maybe there will be a day where you understand. Emperor took another look at the imperial advisor, and then left. The Prince Regent and the others bowed and stood without saying anything. While they had been able to apprehend the imperial advisor on that day, but in actual fact, they had suffered a terrible loss. No one would have thought that Emperor Xia would have brought mighty ones and descended upon Dali Imperial City. After Emperor Li left, the Prince Regent took one look at the imperial advisor. He was just as puzzled as the emperor. Looking at the figure who had once been extraordinarily renowned and prestigious, the one who had been the number figure below the emperor of Dali dynasty, incarcerated within such a prison and looked little more than an old man on his deathbed. The Prince Regent was exasperated as well. Why indeed? The Prince Regent said plainly, and then turned around, leaving the place. Yi Futian had been waiting in Emperor Xia's palace ever since he returned with the emperor to the royal palace. Yen Yuan and the others finally showed up. Yen Yuan came and greeted Emperor Xia in the royal palace. Yi Futian looked at Yen Yuan and the others, who were standing right before him, and he felt a sense of guilt. His eyes then turned to Fei Xue afterward, and Fei Xue faced him as well. Fei Xue, I was the one who got teacher into this mess, Yi Futian said. Fei Xue shook her head. She knew what had happened. His father had been the one who chose to walk that path. Yi Futian did not choose to kill Li Yao after he had apprehended the prince. He was set up by Xia Rong, the prince of Emperor Xia's realm. Yi Futian had intended to let go of Li Yao. The enmity between them ran deep, and yet he wanted to spare the prince nonetheless, which meant that he had taken her father and the others into consideration. No one would have been able to anticipate what ensued following that. Yi Futian, our teacher has made this decision, and he naturally has great expectations for you. I hope you won't let him down, Yin Yuan said. Yi Futian nodded. He resolved to keep that in mind. Follow me, Xia Qingyuan appeared and said. Yin Yuan and the others followed her, and came to the highest point of Emperor Xia's palace. Emperor Xia was with them as well. I, Yin Yuan, have brought my brothers and sisters to express our gratitude to your majesty. Yin Yuan and the group bowed to Emperor Xia. Emperor Xia's appearance had no doubt saved them all. There was no way they would have been able to leave otherwise. I wasn't going to Dali just for your sake after all. There is no need to thank me. Emperor Xia said. What plans do you have from here on out? If you're willing to stay behind in Emperor Xia's realm, I shall see to it. Yin Yuan shook his head and said, We are extremely grateful for what you did, your majesty. However, our teacher had never truly betrayed Dali. If we were to stay behind in Emperor Xia's realm and train, it would have been akin to verifying our teacher's treason. I hope you understand, your majesty. Right. Emperor Xia nodded and asked. So what are your plans now? We intend to head to the Crimson Dragon realm. As such, we're here to ask for passage. There is no way the others, and I will be able to repay your kindness for the time being. If there is anything you need of us in the future, I shall see the debt repaid. Yin Yuan said to Emperor Xia in a manner that was neither haughty nor humble, making his stance clear. He did so even if what happened with the imperial advisor was actually sparked by Xia Rong, the eldest prince. The imperial advisor is someone truly worthy of respect. I'm sure his students will be anything but disappointments in the future. I've been asked to make the trip by someone else, and there is no need for you all to repay me, Emperor Xia said. Yin Yuan and the others looked at Yi Futian, and they naturally knew who did the asking. However, they were still somewhat surprised that Yi Futian had been able to get Emperor Xia to make such a trip personally. Qingyuan, take them to the teleportation matrix, Emperor Xia said to Xia Qingyuan. While he admired Yin Yuan and the others, he saw no need to lean on them. The imperial advisor had stayed honorable throughout. Even if they were to enter Emperor Xia's realm right after their teacher was to be sentenced, no one would have had anything to say about it. However, all of them valued their teacher's reputation. At the very least, they were unable to bring themselves to truly make a traitor out of their teacher. If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. In the palace, teleportation Grand Matrix area. In front of the Grand Matrix of space to the Crimson Dragon realm. In the palace, teleportation Grand Matrix area. In front of the Grand Matrix of space to the Crimson Dragon realm. Yi Futian came to see Yin Yuan, and the others off. Fei Xue stood next to Yi Futian. She turned toward him and whispered, "What happened to father was nothing that we wanted to see, and I hope you will not blame yourself." She could feel the guilt in Yi Futian's heart. He must have been blaming himself all this time. Yi Futian looked at the woman in front of him, and thought that perhaps the person most in pain was Fei Xue. But at the moment, she was still trying to persuade herself. A smile appeared on his face, but it was mixed with some bitterness. He said, "Well, rest assured, I will adjust myself. And you take good care of yourself, after you go to the Crimson Dragon realm, with your senior brother." "I will," Fei Xue nodded gently. "Will you still go to Crimson Dragon realm?" "Well, maybe to Qianye City in Crimson Dragon realm," Yi Futian responded. "Well then, we will see you at the Crimson Dragon realm," Fei Xue whispered softly. She then walked toward the Grand Matrix of space with Yin Yuan and the others as they entered into the matrix. "Everyone take care," Yi Futian said to Yin Yuan and the others. "You too." Yin Yuan nodded at Yi Futian. The brilliant light shone, and the light beams pierced straight through the sky, as if opening up a great path of space. And only for a moment, the bodies of these people disappeared directly from the matrix. Yi Futian looked up at the sky. The channel was still bright with radiance. The energy required for such a realm-crossing matrix was unimaginable. The number of spirit stones of Great Path, consumed by the launching of the Grand Matrix, was an astrological figure each time, and only the top principalities could afford its cost. If one relied upon oneself to go to the Crimson Dragon realm, even the cultivators from the Nirvana plane would take a long time. So that was the reason why Yin Yuan came to borrow the passage. Of course, Yin Yuan was also thankful to Emperor Xia. After all, they could leave safely entirely on account of Emperor Xia. No matter what position the two parties were in, a favor was a favor. Xia Qingyuan stood next to Yi Futian. Her eyes turned and fell on him. This must have touched Yi Futian considerably. "Are you going to the Crimson Dragon realm?" Xia Qingyuan asked after a moment of silence. Yi Futian nodded. "I meant to use the way of the Crimson Dragon realm, to gain a foothold in Crimson Dragon realm, and then leave. It was pure chance that I thought about Dali, and decided to take down Li Yao in Crimson Dragon realm. But I did not expect that the Imperial Advisor would be there. Everything that happened after, the princess is well aware of." Xia Qingyuan was the one person who knew everything that had happened. At the time, right before leaving, Yi Futian had the bright idea of using the Crimson Dragon realm to get rid of Li Yao and set it all up in the Crimson Dragon realm. In reality, he had executed the plan and took down Li Yao. However, because the Imperial Advisor of Dali came also, he was pulled into it, thus created the situation today. But now, Yi Futian must be disappointed. His intention to go away was completely expected. "As I said last time, I will ask my father the Emperor to name you as the City Lord of Qianye City. You will be in charge of the city on behalf of Emperor Xia's realm. From then on, you will be in complete charge, and not subject to anyone in Emperor Xia's realm," Xia Qingyu said. She understood that it was inevitable for Yi Futian to leave Emperor Xia's realm. Qianye City was regarded as their victory, and sending Yi Futian to Qianye City as the city lord meant that he would be considered as a lord of the land. To name him as the city lord was not as fitting as saying that the city would be gifted to him, and they had to send cultivators there to assist with security. After all, Yi Futian's strength was not yet enough to stand alone and defend a city. In the central area of Crimson Dragon Realm, many of the city lords were of the existence in Nirvana Plane. A simple doctrine saint was not nearly the same. "Many thanks to the princess." Yi Futian nodded, and did not refuse Xia Qingyuan's kindness. "I'll return to the villa first," Yi Futian said again. Xia Qingyuan nodded. "I will see you off." And the two left together. Yi Futian did not go to see Emperor Xia and request judgment regarding Xia Rong. Although Xia Rong hurt him this time, he was the crown prince of Emperor Xia's realm and the biological child of Emperor Xia. From the standpoint of Xia Rong, what was the problem of getting rid of someone powerful? such as the imperial advisor of Dali. Even though the means he used were underhanded, between the battle of two major Renhuang's realms, it honestly didn't mean much. Yi Futian had no right to go to Emperor Xia and demand Xia Rong to be punished. He was the outsider, and to a certain extent, Emperor Xia and Xia Qingyuan had been extremely kind to him. Just because Emperor Xia and Xia Qingyuan treated him well, did not mean that he could demand Emperor Xia to dispose of his own son on his account. Xia Rong was not Xiaosheng. Unless one day, he had the ability himself to deal with Xia Rong, then there would be nothing else to discuss. He would do it himself. To ask Emperor Xia to handle the matter, what could be his reasoning? Of course, Yi Futian would not form any opinion on Emperor Xia because of what Xia Rong did. Emperor Xia was Emperor Xia, and Xia Rong was Xia Rong, just like Xia Qingyuan was Xia Qingyuan. Everyone was an independent individual, even if they were a family. This was something that the swordmaster of Lihan and the imperial advisor of Dali had both taught him by action. Of course, this principle could not apply to those who did evil. But for all this, he who had already entered the Saint Plane would make his judgment. After Yi Futian left, Xia Qingyuan came to the place where Emperor Xia was. When Emperor Xia saw Xia Qingyuan arrive, he asked with a smile, "Are you here because of your brother?" "Father, does the last incident have anything to do with what happened this time?" Xia Qingyuan asked. What she was referring to was when Yi Futian's identity was exposed in Dali, and the event that happened at Crimson Dragon Realm. Last time, Xia Rong was not in the palace, Emperor Xia said, looking at Xia Qingyuan. Xia Qingyuan looked up at her father. She knew that her brother Xia Rong was often in the army, in charge of military affairs. Of course, absence does not mean that this matter has nothing to do with him. Maybe he did it, maybe your second brother, third brother. They are all possible suspects, Emperor Xia continued. But why didn't father ever inquire? Xia Qingyuan asked. She understood that if her father had questioned these events, no matter how secretive they were, they would be able to find something. Will father not punish my brother this time? While at the Crimson Dragon Realm, Xia Rong wanted to hurt the imperial advisor of Dali. He did that by using Yi Futian's life as a bet, and there was a very high possibility that Yi Futian could have been killed. Dali dynasty incited the battle with us, and the conflict erupted in the Crimson Dragon Realm. Yi Futian took down Li Yao, but he wanted to release him because of the imperial advisor of Dali. What do you think of what he did? Asked Emperor Xia. Xia Qingyuan looked up at her father and was speechless for a moment. No matter how much respect the imperial advisor of Dali deserved, even if he is kind to Yi Futian, he was regarded as Yi Futian's master. But after all had been said and done, he was the imperial advisor of the enemy. For this battle, we mobilized inconsiderable power in Emperor Xia's realm, and several individuals in the Nirvana plane even went to the Crimson Dragon realm in person as support. Although it was Yi Futian who took Li Yao down, and there was no issue with him seeing things from his angle. For your elder brother, as the Deputy General of Tian who accomplished all this, how could you accuse him? Emperor Xia continued. Xia Qingyuan listened quietly. She also wanted to hear what her father had to say. Whether it is your brother or Yi Futian, everyone is growing. They are all in the Saint Plane. Whatever they want to fight for, I will not stop them. But they must be able to bear the price, even if it is fighting for the throne. Emperor Xia's voice seemed very calm. He said, "Many things that you have to do. I will support them, but in what way you want to accomplish these things solely depends on your ability, and you must consider the consequences." I heard that at the Crimson Dragon realm, the imperial advisor sent Yi Futian a saying, "Gentlemen do not stand close to danger." He was right. Everything you do, you must consider its consequences, and consider what kind of situation you will put yourself in. Today, I will not stop the secret jostling of power between them, nor will I punish your elder brother. In the future, if he has to pay for what he did one day, likewise, I will not stop that either. This is the path of your cultivation, and every cultivator will have to go through all of this in the path of growth, able to bear it all. Emperor Xia slowly said, "You are the same Qingyuan, and you are about to step into the Saint Plane. Maybe one day, you will fly on your own. I understand. Xia Qingyuan nodded slightly, then turned away without saying a word. Watching Xia Qingyuan's departing figure, Emperor Xia said nothing. This was their cultivation. All the storms, setbacks, and tribulations would work to build an era belonging to them. A few days later, clashes broke out between Emperor Xia's realm and Emperor Li's realm in several places with spiritual resources. Subsequently, these conflicts continued to amplify and detonate. The two Renhuang realms kept battling on various major battlefields. King Tiandao and Sacred General of Tian led the armies to confront each other. These things quickly spread to the two realms, and soon, everyone knew that all this was caused by what happened in the Crimson Dragon realm. Or rather, it was caused by the grievances between Yi Futian and Li Yao, the crown prince of Dali dynasty. Once upon a time, Li Yao killed Yi Futian's wife in the land of the Nine States, the lower world of Emperor Xia's realm. Now Yi Futian took him down in Crimson Dragon realm, which led to Li Yao's death. Of course, these border conflicts had not affected the central area of Emperor Xia's realm. Neither of the two realms had the idea of a full-scale border war. Otherwise, it would not just be limited to this scale. In Emperor Xia's palace, there was a declaration that Emperor Xia officially named Yi Futian as the city lord of Qianye City to guard Qianye City in the Crimson Dragon realm for Emperor Xia's realm. If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. For some time afterward, Yi Futian cultivated in retreat at the cottage villa. For some time afterward, Yi Futian cultivated in retreat at the cottage villa. Not only him, but many at the villa had gained something during this trip, with several of them having broken into the Saint Plane. They needed to comprehend the way of the Saint Plane in earnest and integrate it into their strength. After Gu Donglu entered into the divine path, his whole person had gone through a great transformation. It was as if his life spirit had once again awoken, rendering his temperament even more remarkable. The same was also true of Yu Sheng. He was born into the way, but his changes were more internal. Once in battle, his potential had completely erupted and was completely different from before. Many people in the Crimson Dragon realm had already experienced his battling method. After Yi Wuchen entered into the Saint Plane, he had endeavored to refine the Renhuang sword will into his swordsmanship, and was progressing little by little. After Huang Jioga comprehended the swordsmanship, he had also begun to try to impact the realm of sainthood. Except for Glass Saint, she was still the same as before, unable to get out of the predicament she was in. This made it difficult for her to make progress in her cultivation. Even though she often cultivated with Yaya, she was still trapped by her own demons, as if she really wanted for nothing and felt nothing. A few months later, news came out of Emperor Xia's palace that the little princess Xia Qingyuan broke into the sainthood. This news soon spread throughout Emperor Xia's realm. The little princess was extraordinarily talented and very young. Among the many top characters in Emperor Xia's realm, she was the cultivator who entered into the divine path the fastest. Even compared to her several other brothers, none of them were younger than her when they entered the Saint Plane. Countless people lamented that perhaps in the future, little Princess Xia Qingyuan could match the achievements of Emperor Xia and enter the realm of Renhuang. Of course, this day was still too far away. Compared to this, the people of Emperor Xia's realm were more concerned about the marriage of the little princess. Looking at Emperor Xia's realm, who could be worthy of a peerless figure, such as the little princess? And many had counted the many geniuses of Emperor Xia's realm. They found that in Emperor Xia's realm, the only person who was qualified to stand next to the little princess was still that person who could slay the saints while in the realm of sage. Princess Xia Qingyuan entered sainthood, and Emperor Xia hosted a feast in Emperor Xia's palace to celebrate, like a holy ceremony. Countless people felt the love that Emperor Xia had for the little princess. On this day, inside Emperor Xia's palace, many top principalities of Emperor Xia's realm gathered along with those top figures whose fame was known throughout the world. Its scale was far grander than that of Old Man Zhao's birthday banquet. This was the celebration of Xia Qingyuan's sainthood, Perhaps there was a deeper meaning hidden behind Emperor Xia's action. Of course, no one knew exactly what Emperor Xia intended. On this day, almost all the top figures were there, including the peak existences, such as the Sword Master of Lihan, Lord of Xianyuan Palace, the Master of Jiutian Temple, the Master of Tianji Pavilion, and the Valley Master of Divine Cloud Valley. At the banquet, Emperor Xia sat high upon his throne, with Queen Xiao and Xia Qingyuan on each side of him. The other princes were sitting below Xia Qingyuan. After all, this was a celebration for Xia Qingyuan. All the top figures had arrived, but at the banquet, Xia Qingyuan's look was calm, and she seemed uninterested. Her eyes sometimes looked far into the distance. Today's banquet was filled with many cultivators, but one person was missing. Many people had also noticed Xia Qingyuan's look, and these top figures understood. No one mentioned anything about the princess marriage at the banquet. It seemed that the crowning jewel in Emperor Xia's realm was now grown up, and her heart had already found its belonging. But that man was not there today. Perhaps it had something to do with what happened at the Crimson Dragon realm. Emperor Xia had already named him the Lord of Qinya City. Perhaps soon, he would leave Emperor Xia's realm for Crimson Dragon realm. After that, it was very unlikely that he would return to Emperor Xia's realm in the future. After the banquet was over, Emperor Xia asked Swordmaster of Lihan, Lord of Xianyuan Palace, and other peak figures to stay so he could talk to them. No one knew what they talked about. Until not long after, people were able to faintly assume one thing, which shocked many in Emperor Xia's realm, and they continued to guess Emperor Xia's real motivation. When Emperor Xia's palace hosted the banquet, Futian was not in the upper world, but went to the 9 states to take a few people to the upper world. A few days later, Futian and his party gathered at the cottage villa. Everyone from the lower worlds of 9 states was there. Futian stood in front, holding the hand of a young girl. It was Little Grass, the daughter of the 4th senior brother, Shuiyi, and his wife Yoshi. Linger stood on the other side, and took Little Grass's other hand. Lulan Shui stood quietly behind them. Knife Saint Gu Donglu and Zhuge Mingyue were all there. Of course Yi Wuchen, Huang Jioga, Su Kei, and Yuan Zhang were also present. Yaya and Glass Saint stood quietly behind. Obviously, they were prepared to go on a long-distance trip. Otherwise, it would not involve everyone departing. Futian levitated into the air and glanced behind him. They had stayed here for a few years. After leaving today, it would be unlikely that they would return often. Although the Red Dragon realm was chaotic and the strong preyed on the weak, in fact, it cohered more to the principle of survival of the fittest, where everything was more direct. Everything was based on power. More importantly, the Crimson Dragon realm was freer. As the primary realm of the Crimson Dragon region, no other Renhuang could interfere in the affairs of the Crimson Dragon realm. If one was strong enough, then one could create an empire of one's own, one that no one could shake, just like the city lords of yore. During this trip, he prepared to establish his foothold in the Crimson Dragon realm, and when everything was settled, he would embark to the more distant Supreme Path region. Yu Sheng would also cultivate at the regional palace of the Crimson Dragon realm. Let's go, Futian said. Suddenly, this large group of people moved toward the distance. Soon, the cottage villa was emptied and seemed extraordinarily quiet. There were already many waiting in Emperor Xia's palace. When Futian and his party arrived, they saw a group of people appearing in front of them, the head of which was Xia Qingyuan. Obviously, Xia Qingyuan was also preparing to leave Emperor Xia's palace and travel to Crimson Dragon realm. Aside from Xia Qingyuan, Futian also saw a lot of familiar faces. For example, the first person of Lihan Heaven, who once fought with him on the 33 layers of heaven, Wang Chuan. There were also Xianyuan Ao of Xianyuan Palace and Gongsun Zhong of Divine Cloud Valley. Futian also saw the people from the 9 states, such as Bai Luli. After these people received the order from Xia Qingyuan to go to the upper world, they were under the order of Xia Qingyuan. And now, they were planning on traveling with her. Why are you here? Behind Futian, Luo Fan asked another person. Futian looked over there and saw that next to Gongsun Zhong, Gongsun and I and Gongsun Xian were there. And Luo Fan was speaking to Gongsun Xian. Clearly he was surprised. Why can't I be here? Gongsun Xian retorted. Luo Fan blinked and saw a pair of enchanting but slightly angry eyes, and he dared not look straight at them. Yi Futian watched with a smile on his face. Apparently, someone was able to trump the fifth senior brother. Luo Fan had always been cynical, but now it seemed that his status in the family would be jeopardized in the future. Yi Futian glanced at the people who were present, and immediately understood that Emperor Xia had already talked to all the top forces. Many people from various forces had sent their youngsters to accompany them on the trip to the Crimson Dragon Realm, but they should also be willing to go. After all, being able to travel long distances was a trial in itself. As for Emperor Xia's exact command, it was not something he could have known. However, to be able to see so many familiar faces had lifted his mood. Is the princess also prepared to stay in the Crimson Dragon Realm for a long time? Yi Futian asked. In addition to those youngsters, each force had also dispatched some powerful saints to travel with them. Clearly, this was the result of the last banquet. This trip is for trials out there. You can rest assured that since my father, the emperor, named you the city lord of Qinya City, everyone will obey your orders in the city, including me, Xia Qingyuan said to Yi Futian. I would not dare, Yi Futian whispered softly. But seeing Xia Qingyuan looking at him, he continued. But thank you, Your Highness. Obviously, Emperor Xia did so because of what happened last time. He wanted to travel further, and so Emperor Xia deliberately arranged to secure the foundation of Qinya City. This was truly allowing him to become a lord of the empire. Qinya City was wholly entrusted to him. As for the result, it would solely be dependent on his ability. Qingyuan, when are we going? At this moment, a voice was heard, and Yi Futian saw another group coming toward them. It was Yao Shi, who had also brought many people to go along with her. Xia Qingyuan looked indifferent. She merely glanced at Yao Shi and ignored her question. Young Master Yi, you've been well. Yao Shi was not bothered by Xia Qingyuan's treatment towards her, and didn't get angry. She smiled at Yi Futian. Yao Shi was clad in expensive clothing. She looked noble and holy, like a real noble princess. Even more so than Xia Qingyuan. After all, Xia Qingyuan was still in man's clothing, casual and simple. Princess Yao Shi is also going to Qinya City, Yi Futian said. Yes, Yao Shi said. I have always wanted to go out and see the world. Now that I have a chance, I will come along. Yi Futian didn't say much. Yao Shi was now the princess of Emperor Xia's realm. Whatever she wanted to do was not something within his control. Let's go then, Yi Futian said. Xia Qingyuan nodded, and the group set off immediately, moving towards the teleportation Grand Matrix. Gongsun Xian stepped forward, and without realizing it, approached Yi Futian and his party, next to Luo Fan. Xianyuan Ao of Xianyuan Palace walked behind Yu Sheng. He asked him as he was walking, I heard that you decimated the geniuses of the Crimson Dragon Realm during the Battle of Crimson River, and will enter the regional palace at Crimson Dragon Realm to cultivate. As the descendant of Xianyuan clan, he certainly knew a little about the Crimson Dragon Realm. The ancient books in the family had also recorded what the regional palace was like, and many elders even knew about it. It was known as the first sacred place of cultivation in Crimson Dragon Realm. What is it? Yu Sheng said, looking at Xianyuan Ao. Xianyuan Ao also had a husky built. Standing next to Yu Sheng, he did not appear any less brawny. He looked at Yu Sheng and said, When we get to Crimson Dragon Realm, can I cultivate with you? Many people heard Xianyuan Ao's words, and turned their heads back to look at him. This proud descendant of Xianyuan Palace showed no sign of proudness at this moment. This made many who knew Xianyuan Ao look rather strange. No, Yu Sheng spat. It was a resolute refusal. He continued to move forward, leaving a shocked crowd behind. If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. Crimson Dragon Realm, Qinya City. Crimson Dragon Realm, Qinya City. Yi Futian and his party came forward in a mighty manner, and descended directly into the city lord's office of Qinya City. After that previous battle, the city lord's office still seemed to be in ruins. The ruins were exceptionally quiet. An exhalation of breath seemed to be released from the dilapidated remains of the city lord's office. Then Yi Futian saw a figure rise up into the sky. It was the previous city lord Shen Tianzhan. Only Shen Tianzhan remained in the city lord's office. Everyone else was gone. The city lord has returned, Shen Tianzhan said to Yi Futian. He'd known that Yi Futian would come back sooner or later. This time, Yi Futian seemed to have brought a lot of people with him. The princess of Emperor Xia's realm, Xia Qingyuan, was among them as well. In addition, there were many cultivators from every plane, making the composition of the group even more complicated and mixed than it had been the last time. Elder, what is this? Yi Futian asked, looking at the ruins. Since Shen Tianzhan had stayed to wait for him, it meant that he still recognized Yi Futian as the city lord of Qinya City. However, if that was the case, why had Shen Tianzhan not ordered for repairs of the city lord's office? Moreover, why had everyone else disappeared? It seemed as if Shen Tianzhan was the only one left in this vast city lord's office. After the battle a few months ago, the cultivators of Emperor Xia's realm and Emperor Li's realm both withdrew. Xiangnan saw that Qinya City was empty and wanted to take Qinya City for Emperor Xiang's realm. He ordered an attack to kill me. Not only me, but several principalities in Qinya City were also attacked by the people of Xiang City. Situ Zhong, the head of the Situ clan, was injured during these attacks. Many people lost their lives. I dismissed everyone from the city lord's office to prevent them from being harmed, Shen Tianzhan said. When Yi Futian heard what he said, his expression turned blank. In the past, during the battle between the two Renhuang realms, Xiang Nan had wanted to take the opportunity to profit, wanting to gain all the advantages without participating in the war, to use threats to put a squeeze on their resources. He had given him some, but he'd been far from able to satisfy Xiang Nan's appetite. On the day of the great battle, Xiang Nan had brought people to threaten them. However, Xia Rong's iron-wrought determination had deterred Xiang Nan. As soon as he'd made a move, he'd been caught up in the battle between the two Renhuang realms. The cultivators of Emperor Xia's realm would have killed him at any cost. Xiang Nan had not dared to make his move. Meanwhile, his followers had not been silly enough to interfere in the battle between the two Renhuang realms. But after the battle between the two Renhuang realms, they had returned to their respective lands. Xiang Nan had naturally anticipated that fightings would ensue within the two Renhuang realms, which would set off a storm. So he'd thought of attacking Qinya City. Emperor Xiang's realm already required a considerable number of cultivators to guard the one city they occupied. They could not spare too many others to be dispatched to the Crimson Dragon realm to guard the two cities for a prolonged period. Just like Emperor Xia's realm and Emperor Li's realm, they did not have many who were of the Nirvana plane. They could not possibly dispatch them all to guard the Crimson Dragon realm. Therefore, it was more likely that Xiang Nan had wanted to vent the humiliation he'd suffered during the Battle of the Crimson River, during which he'd been scared by Xia Rong into not fighting, which had caused much of his indignation. As a result, he'd sent people to harass Shen Tianzhan, wanting him to submit and agree to defend Qinya City for Emperor Xiang's realm. However, Shen Tianzhan had resisted stubbornly, displeasing Xiang Nan considerably. Since Shen Tianzhan had been willing to surrender to Yi Futian, but had refused to become an affiliate of Emperor Xiang's realm, one could imagine Xiang Nan's feelings about it. So, he'd repeatedly sent people to keep the city lord's office of Qinya City in a state of ruin. After Yi Futian learned what had happened, he said to Shen Tianzhan, "It's been hard for you. It's finally time to rebuild the city lord's office." "Very well," Shen Tianzhan nodded. He had previously promised to stay on as the deputy city lord because of the defeat, though it had not been a sincere surrender. But what happened later had made him realize that maybe, by standing beside Yi Futian, he would see things differently. On the contrary, Xiang Nan, the prince of Emperor Xiang's realm, was resentful because of his defeat at Crimson River. He'd even gone so far as resorting to retaliation and extortion. His villainous acts were far worse than anything Yi Futian had ever done. Shen Tianzhan would loathe to even be in contact with such a person, much less follow and obey him. No matter what, he was on the Nirvana plane, the last realm of the divine path. Suddenly, a surging wind rose up. A group of people was seen walking in the air in the distant void. They stopped a ways off, and looked at Yi Futian and the others. Likewise, Yi Futian and Shen Tianzhan looked at them. They heard the leader of the group say, "Shen Tianzhan, we had given you many opportunities, and His Royal Highness had been unceasingly benevolent. Our paths are different. We cannot work together," Shen Tianzhan said to the people in the void. Yi Futian turned and said to them, "Go back and tell Xiang Nan that if he wants Qinya City, send someone to come and fight me for it. If he dares not, then by all means, stay quietly in Xiang City." The messenger stared at Yi Futian. After a while, he turned to leave, thinking that the people of Emperor Xia's realm had arrived too soon. What had happened in the past did not seem to have caused a division inside Emperor Xia's realm. On that day, Crown Prince Xia Rong, Xia Qingyuan, and Yi Futian had clearly been divided into two different camps. But now, Yi Futian and Xia Qingyuan had returned together with reinforcements. This meant that Qinya City would most likely be entrusted to Yi Futian in the future. The people in Xiang City left, but Yi Futian's eyes still maintained their coldness. Xiang Nan had once again exercised his old trick of profiting from others' misfortunes. He had no conscience, and was not afraid to show it. The news of Yi Futian's return, and the return of all the top forces of Qinya City soon spread. Situ Yen and Situ Zhong had both arrived as well. "Elder, I know about Xiang Nan. I will settle the score with him on your behalf," Yi Futian said by way of greeting to Situ Zhong. "I am relieved to hear you say that, City Lord Yi," Situ Zhong responded. "I have also brought along some reinforcements to see if we can be of assistance." As he was speaking, Situ Zhong mobilized his people. Some of the top forces in Qinya City began working together to build the new City Lord's office. In the world of cultivators, the time spent building was extremely accelerated. In just a short time, a brand new City Lord's office rose from the ground. "Choose your place of cultivation," Yi Futian said as he walked toward the main hall of the City Lord's office. Xia Qingyuan chose a hall next to him. Yao Shi did the same, as if she was intentionally competing with her. The other cultivators all chose their places of cultivation in the new City Lord's office. Those who'd come from the top forces of Emperor Xia's realm each set up a camp and chose an area in which to reside. Yi Futian faced the people next to him and said, "Little butterfly, you should choose an area to be used as a medicinal pool and herb garden." Next to Little Butterfly was Saint Zhang's eldest disciple Su Chehan. Not long ago, when Yi Futian had taken the trip to the lower world, he hadn't only brought along his relatives. Saint Jiang had ordered Su Chehan, who had already entered the Saint Plane, to accompany him. The husband and wife, along with Little Butterfly, had followed Yi Futian and cultivated with him. In the days when the sacred war was being waged against the palace, Su Chehan had fully comprehended the way. Later, when he'd finally been able to enter the realm of the divine path by his own merit, Saint Jiang taught him everything he knew. The great teacher Su of today was no longer comparable to the one of the past. Furthermore, the resources of the Crimson Dragon realm were incomparable to those of the lower world of the 9 states. In the future, Su Chehan and Little Butterfly would need to collect better materials for treatments or medicinal baths. Yi Futian situated the people from the 9 states into one area. Yu Sheng, Yi Qingxian, Wuchen and Lu Qinyu, Gu Donglu, the second senior sister, and the rest were staying in the main house with Yi Futian. After all the arrangements were made, Yi Futian went over to Yaya and said, "Yaya, come with me." Yaya nodded, walking away with Yi Futian and Black Wind Condor. In Peacock City of the Crimson Dragon realm, Yi Futian found Kong Xian. Kong Xian was a little surprised by Yi Futian's arrival. She asked, "Are you looking for me?" "Yes." Yi Futian nodded. "There is a matter at hand that requires Princess Kong Xian's help." "What matter?" Kong Xian asked doubtfully. Beside her, Jialo Feng's eyes were extremely cold as he fixed his stare on Yi Futian. When he'd last been on the battlefield of Crimson River, his divine feathers had been plucked by Yu Sheng. This demonic beast of mine has some gifts in cultivation, but he can't seem to enter the divine path. I'm not very familiar with the cultivation of the demonic realm, and want to send this little condor to the Peacock Demon Emperor's realm to cultivate. Therefore, I've come to ask for your help, said Yi Futian. Even though Black Wind Condor already knew what Yi Futian wanted to do, when he heard those words, the Black Wind Condor couldn't help but turtle up his neck and shiver uncontrollably as he stole a glance at Kong Xian. It was a truly crazy idea that might cost the little condor his life. Even Kong Xian was stunned for a moment. Her cold and sharp eyes swept towards the Black Wind Condor. While they'd been at the empty realm, the Black Wind Condor had not spared her any humiliation. Those words echoed in her head to this day. Kong Xian, come quickly to serve my lord. At the time, she could not wait to cut the Black Wind Condor into 1,000 pieces to quench the hatred in her heart. However, since she'd entered into sainthood, her state of mind had gone through some changes. Her hatred was not so strong anymore. That was why, when she'd first seen the Black Wind Condor, she had not immediately thrown a tantrum. She looked at Yi Futian coldly and said, Yi Futian, do you know what you are asking? Have her take this Black Wind Condor to cultivate? This Black Wind Condor, whose mouth spewed out nothing but garbage? Does this dumb beast qualify? Jialo Feng asked mockingly. A sharp whistling sound came from the mouth of the Black Wind Condor. Suddenly a great gust of wind whipped up. Its eyes glanced at Jialo Feng, as its form morphed into a bolt of dark golden lightning, and rushed toward him. The divine feathers of Jialo Feng glimmered brightly, as the extremely sharp golden blades slashed towards them. The Black Wind Condor did not retreat. It turned into frightening lightning and thunder. Its wings extended, cutting through the void. Boom! With a loud sound, Jialo Feng's body was thrown backward. The Black Wind Condor returned to Yi Futian's side in a radiant arc and glanced scornfully at Jialo Feng. The little condor possesses all the comprehension of my cultivation. It is very talented, but its entrance into the Saint Plane had been delayed. I don't know what should be done next, so I thought to send it to the Peacock Demon Emperor's realm, Yi Futian said. I know that there were several offenses made in the past, but those are inevitable on the battlefield. We beg the princess's indulgence in these matters. I want to send little Condor to the Demon Emperor's realm in the hopes of building a friendship, not a rivalry. Kong Xian looked at Yi Futian deeply, then nodded. Very well. Seeing that Kong Xian had agreed, the Black Wind Condor took a secretive look at her beautiful face and shivered again. Little Condor was unlucky. It had barely escaped the hands of the she-devil, only to face yet another danger. If you find any errors, broken links, non-standard content, etc., please let us know so we can fix it as soon as possible. You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.